Okay, so for the purposes of our session today, we are going to work from the premise that all text is rhetorical. And if you're not used to using that word, what does that mean? It just means that authors compose texts, speakers compose verbal, messages to inform, persuade, and motivate audiences. Not one or the other, but that all generated message really does have at its core the need to inform someone of something, to persuade something of something, and to motivate them to think a certain way or even to do something. So, why is it important for us to work from this premise today? It's because understanding author's purpose helps us to think about their choices. I've got a long list here, not exhaustive, but a long list of all the choices that go into words that make it into the final draft of the text or the final thought that you have before you actually are saying something to someone else. There are lots of choices that go into it. And we have to give our learners a method to ascertain author's purpose if we expect them to comprehend, analyze, explain, evaluate all of these choices that authors make in the texts that we read, in the videos that we show, even in our own correspondence. So if we're not going to use pi, what are we going to use? We're going to go way back to classical education. All right. Aristotle used a triangle to teach these concepts, right? And in the middle of the triangle is where you place the text under observation, right? It can be an entire text. You'd have a hard time fitting it in the triangle, but it could be an entire book or an entire article, or it could be a couple of sentences or even a page, whatever language you're actually attempting to have the students analyze. Outside the bottom left-hand corner or vertice, you've got the speaker, the writer, the generator of the language. Then in the right-hand corner, you've got the audience, or as I like to say, the intended audience. The reason I make that distinction is because many of the texts that we do read in class were not always written. They were not intended to be read by school children, right? We have adopted those because we feel like they are the best text to teach a certain way that an author does things. And then at the top corner, we have the exigence. In other words, the rhetorical situation. What was going on that required some sort of messaging, right? In verbal exchanges, there might be an immediate situation that has prompted someone to say something, to communicate in some way. And then with texts that have been published, there were things going on. Art imitates life. And so the artist was inspired by something to make a certain statement, to build a certain world, to get across a certain message, which remember, we are working from the premise that they also had an underlying agenda is too strong of a word in most cases, maybe not all, but basically they had an underlying prompting. What message does the reader need to hear? Now, we use exigence or the rhetorical situation. We use that phrasing in AP Lang and in college courses. But when we're working with, lower grade students, we want to refer to this top corner as the author's purpose. It's not a directly exchangeable phrase, but it does work for this strategy. And then when we're thinking about Aristotle's choice of a triangle versus a rhombus or a circle, a sphere, there is a reason why. In classical times, the students, all males, of course, at that time, they took math, they took rhetoric, and they took gymnastics. That's what they did. And Aristotle had a very particular reason for choosing a triangle to teach these concepts. And it was because, as you can see here, the angles of this triangle, if you were to add their degrees together, you're going to get 180 degrees. And the reason he chose a triangle for the purpose of analyzing all components of author's purpose is because if you were to move one corner or one vertice, and notice how the degrees of the angle change as I move it, but notice also, if I'm moving A, what happens to the degrees beside the B vertice and the C vertice? If I change one component of this triangle, it automatically requires a change at the other two vertices. And likewise with author's purpose and craft. If I go back one slide, if we change the intended audience of a text, then that is going to require changes to the text itself, right? If you change one, it changes everything.